Council. Today we're at Johnson Creek Park, and we're going to talk about water quality testing. We're going to wait a little bit for people to funnel in here, so if we want to kind of take a look at the park. It's a really nice day out today. It's like in the 70s. It's pretty warm. We got a little duck floating on by. We've seen a lot of wildlife already here. We've seen a woodpecker, we've seen a couple hummingbirds, different kinds of ducks. It's been pretty exciting just the past couple minutes we've been here. Alright, so now we're going to get started. So we're at Johnson Creek Park. It's located at Southeast 21st and Clatsop Street. It's a fairly smaller park. It's only about 4 acres, but it's really beautiful. It's got a little bit of the restored area that you saw. There's more structures, play structure, and bathrooms over there. Yeah, it's a really great little park. It's really unique in its location. So it's right on the corner of the confluence of Crystal Springs Creek and Johnson Creek, so where the two meet. And it's also about only a mile away from the confluence of Johnson Creek and the Willamette River. So really interesting spot to do some water quality testing in. So we're going to first start with what is water quality testing. So water quality testing kind of describes the condition of water, including chemical, physical, and biological characteristics. There's lots of different ways you can test this. You can use electronic devices, some indicator drops, there's tablets you can put in water. Yeah, in lots of different ways. You can also measure a lot of different things. So 4 of the tests we'll be doing today is pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and turbidity. But you can also measure things like metals, nutrients, ammonia. You can even measure aquatic organisms that live in the creek. We look for things called indicator species. So they're macroinvertebrates. They're little aquatic insects that live in the river. And just by measuring their presence, absence kind of tells us a little bit about the health of the creek. Yeah, so before we dive into the specific tests we're going to do, I kind of want to talk about what affects water quality here along Johnson Creek. So Johnson Creek's a fairly big watershed. It's definitely one of the smaller ones in Oregon, but it still covers a lot of area. It's about 54 square miles. It goes from where the headwaters, which is in Boring, Oregon, and it goes all the way down to the confluence in Milwaukee, which is kind of where we're at a little bit right now. And there's lots of different land uses within the watershed. So the upper watershed is more agriculture and nurseries. And so some implications that might have is when it rains, a lot of the chemicals that they're using can wash off into the river, like herbicides and pesticides. The middle of the watershed is the Gresham area, some more suburbs. So one implication that can have is there's a lot of pavement, so that the water doesn't seep into the ground, it runs off the pavement. So that can kind of take any of the icky stuff on the pavement with it, like oil from cars, any debris that's been dropped, any other chemicals you can think of that's been dropped on the street. And then once we get down to the lower watershed, kind of where we're at right now, we get into more of city of Portland, definitely more densely populated, and just a lot more amplified effects like from the suburbs. Yeah, so that's kind of the implications, some things that might affect water quality along Johnson Creek. But a question is why does it matter? Why does it matter if temperatures are too high, or maybe pH levels are too low? Why does it matter if water quality differs? So one big factor is wildlife. When we talk about water quality, we're often talking about how it influences wildlife or humans. So we have a lot of wildlife here along Johnson Creek. If you look just right over there, it's a beaver chew. So we got a lot of beavers along Johnson Creek. We also have river otters. There's lots of ducks, lots of other birds. There's the macroinvertebrates, the insects that live in the water. And another really big important species that we like to study is salmon. So Johnson Creek is actually one of the only rivers in Portland that still have threatened and endangered salmon living in it. And one kind of important note to add is that while they're coming back from the ocean, they have to go through the Columbia and the Willamette before they reach Johnson Creek. So the Columbia and Willamette rivers are pretty hot. They don't have a lot of canopy cover, and they're very industrialized too. There's a lot of activity going on. So they're already having kind of a hard time getting here. So when they get here, we want to make sure our water quality is really great and really hospitable for salmon here. Especially since we're so close here at Johnson Creek Park to the confluence where the Willamette is. So yeah, that's kind of a little background on water quality testing. So now we're going to get into more of our specific tests. So the first one we're going to do is temperature. We're going to use this little temperature probe here. So water temperature is one of the most important factors of survival of aquatic life. If temperatures are too high or too low, productivity can decrease or metabolic function can cease. So organisms vary greatly with their temperature tolerance. Some have wide ranges, some have smaller ranges, but if any of that temperature goes outside their range, then they can die. So temperature is definitely a big deal, especially with salmon. Salmon like it really cold. So to do this test, it's fairly simple. You're going to take this probe and you're going to put it in the creek here. You want to cover up those little dots at the bottom, so that way it's fully covered at the bottom with water. And typically you'll leave this in here for about a minute, maybe 2 minutes. So I already did this test earlier, so we don't have to wait anymore. And the temperature that I got was 14 degrees Celsius, which is about 57 degrees Fahrenheit. So yeah, that's our temperature for this reach of Johnson Creek. And we're going to talk about results a little bit later. So we're going to go on to the next test, which is pH. So here are kind of our indicator slides here we'll be using. So a pH value shows the intensity of acid or alkaline conditions. In general, acidity is a measure of a substance's ability to neutralize bases, and alkalinity is a measure of substances' ability to neutralize acids. So kind of to get an idea of what these numbers even mean, I'll give you some examples. So like battery acid is considered a 1, and so that is extremely acidic. It's not even on our wide range slides here. A lemon is 2, which is also very acidic. Coffee is considered 5, which is mildly acidic. Water is considered 7, which is neutral. And an antacid is 9.5, which is fairly basic. And bleach is 12.5, which is strongly basic. So generally, pH doesn't vary that much. Anything below 6.5 or above 8.5 is going to be inhospitable to aquatic life. So now we're going to do the tests here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fill this tube to the 10 millimeter mark on top here. We'll just fill it in the creek water right here. Alright, that's pretty close. So now once we've done that, we're going to take our wide range indicator here and we're going to add 10 drops to that. So just screw off the cap here and we'll add 10 drops. Alright, and then once we've done that, we will put the cap back on, and then we're just going to kind of gently rock it back and forth to mix the mixture. So now, once we've done that, we're going to use kind of our viewer here, and we'll put the tube here, right there. And then, so those slides I showed you earlier, we're going to put both in and see and match the colors. So first I'm going to start with the 3.0 to 6.5 slide and put it right in there. So basically what we're doing here is we're matching the color of the test tube and seeing which color it best matches on the slide. So go ahead and take a look at that and see what you think maybe matches the best here. And then I'll switch out the other slide, and this next one here is going to be 7.0 to 10.5. So go ahead and match those colors there and see what you think. Alright, now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and take a look there. It's a little green right now, so I would say our pH level is around the 7.5 mark. Go ahead and take a look there again. Yeah, it might be a little hard to tell on video, but 7.5 is probably the range. So I'm going to write that down, and we're going to go over our measurements a little later. So our next water quality test we're going to do is we're going to do dissolved oxygen content. So dissolved oxygen refers to the level of free non-compound oxygen present in the water. So fish and other aquatic life need oxygen to breathe, just like we do. The difference is that they extract it from dissolved oxygen in the water. So these are the kind of levels that we're looking at here. So the way we're going to do this test is we're first going to fill this tube here to the 25 millimeter mark where my thumb is. And we're going to fill that with creek water. Alright, we got about 25 here. And then we're going to take this, what's called an ampule, this little test thing here, and we're going to stick it at the bottom. Now it might be kind of hard to see, but there's little notches at the bottom of this tube, and we're going to actually break that glass tip off. Alright, I just did it there. So now the tube should be filling with a blue liquid, kind of like what you saw on the display. And when you do this, make sure that you don't break off too much, or it's going to break the liquid into the creek liquid I took in my test cup. And then also make sure you hold it in there for a couple seconds. So now that I've done that, I'm going to take it out and make sure you don't dump that water back in the creek because it's considered wastewater now. So, but now we're going to take this ampule and we're going to kind of just do the same thing, go back and forth. You're going to see the little bubble float to the top, and now again, we'll do that a couple times. Yeah, so after a couple times of that, generally you're going to want to wait 2 minutes, but I already did it for us earlier, and here's kind of the color that it's turned out to be. So now we're going to do something similar as the pH test, where we're going to compare it to that slide you saw earlier. So here's our indicator sampler slide, and so now I'm going to put our test ampule next to the ones on the test slide. So I'll just kind of move it around so you can see what color best represents it. Move it down here. So you're just trying to match the colors the best you can. Which one you think it's the closest to. Yeah, so now that we've done that, I'll go ahead and take a look there. I would say it's pretty close to the 10 mark, maybe in between, so about 11 is what I would say its approximate color is. Yeah, so real quick, I'm going to set this down, and I'll write that on our data sheet that we got 11. So now we're going to do our last test, which is turbidity. And so we're going to be kind of using this Secchi disc card. So turbidity is the measure of suspended sediment in the water. This can, and some implications of too much turbidity can be, it can gunk up salmon gills if there's too much sediment in the water. Also, the sediments can reflect light too, and so they can absorb the sunlight and make the body of water hotter. And also sediments can build up over time and just block water passages in general. So that's kind of why we're looking at turbidity here. So for this test, we're going to take this tube here and we're going to fill it to the 25 millimeter mark. So I'll do that real quick with our duck friends over there. Poured out too much. Alright, so that's around the 25 millimeter mark. So now we're going to take that card that you saw and we're going to place it on the outline of where the tube's going to be. So right in the middle. And we want to put that tube right over that middle Secchi disc. So yeah, you're going to look into the tube and you're basically going to compare and see how faded this middle Secchi disc looks and see which one of these on the side best represents that. So if it's like really faded, it might be 100 JTU, like you barely see it at all. If it's not faded at all, it might be 0, like there's no sediment in the water. So it might be hard to see on camera, but determine what you think is the turbidity measure. I'm going to take a look now and see what I think. Yeah, so I think the turbidity is actually very, very clear. I would almost say 0, maybe 5. There's a little bit of particles in there, but it's not very faded at all. So it's very clear water today. And since we didn't use chemicals for this one, I can put the water back in the creek. All right, so I will write down our score there, which I'll just say it was around 5. Great, so now that we've done our measurements, now we're going to kind of discuss what these measurements mean, right? Like, was these good scores, were they bad? So I'm going to use some graphs to represent that. I got these graphs from World Salmon Watch, which is a great organization. They do a lot of field trips with water quality testing as well, so if you're interested in that. So now we're going to look at this graph here. So this is dissolved oxygen content. The score that we got was 11. So what we do on this graph is we go to the 11 mark here, and then we see what it crosses over, these bars here. So, and it kind of says whether or not these species can be tolerable for that. So for 11, it's right at the tail end of egg and alvin incubation for salmon. It definitely crosses over salmonoid growth. It's just barely at the end of salmonoid spawning, and it looks like it crosses the rest of these. So carp, mayfly, stonefly, mosquito, pond snails, crayfish, a lot of these are macroinvertebrates, which I mentioned earlier. So overall, with our 11 score, I'd say the dissolved oxygen concentration is pretty good. It just doesn't really barely cover salmonoid spawning and egg and alvin incubation, so it could be better. But overall, 11 is a pretty decent score. So now we're going to go to the next graph, which I have, and that is temperature. So kind of a similar graph here. So we said temperature was 14 degrees Celsius and 57.2 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's going to be like right here on the bar here. So again, we're going to see what it crosses over here. So it crosses all these bars right here, which is juvenile growth, egg and alvin incubation, spawning, and migration. So that's great. It covers all of these here. It looks like it also covers the bottom ones here, which is aquatic insects, pond snails, and crayfish. And it looks like it does not cover these bars here, which looks like lethal to adults, lethal to smolts, diseases and bacteria, so all the bad stuff. So that's a pretty good score, right? So the temperature is hospitable for salmon. It's not going to kill them. It's a fairly decent temperature, which is great. That's actually one of the most focused tests that we do here at the council. So now we're going to move on to the next graph, which is going to be pH. So again, let's see, we got our pH, we said around 7.5. So that's going to be kind of in between here. Again, here are the examples. So like distilled water is considered a 7. We said 7.5, so the pH is a little high. That's the pH of blood, apparently, is what this graph says. But as you can see, it crosses almost all of the bars, right? Salmonoids, mayfly, stonefly, caddisfly, pond snail, crayfish, cattail, water lilies, protozoas. It covers all of them. So like I said, pH doesn't vary that much. If it did, it would be extremely lethal. So our pH score is good. This is what we want it to be at. And then for turbidity, I don't have a graph for that, but our score was 5 JTU. So in general, I'll bring up this card here. So in general, you don't want anything to be above 10 JTU. So in between these two discs here. Anything above that it's not considered inhospitable, but it definitely wouldn't be great for the salmon. And anything 100 JTU would probably be inhospitable. But some of you that may live along Johnson Creek may say, like, well, I've seen the creek turn brown before. And that is definitely accurate. So Johnson Creek is considered a flashy creek. Since it's so urbanized, when it rains a lot, all that water hits the pavement like we talked about earlier and goes straight into the creek. So it's taking a lot of sediments with it too. So that's why the creek turns really brown after a heavy rain, is because it's all that sediment load in there. Yeah, so that's not great for salmon. It doesn't last super long, but it definitely lasts a little bit, and it isn't great for salmon, but it won't kill them. So that is all the tests we have for today. The overall health of Johnson Creek, I would give it like B+, A-. It's looking really good. The temperature is really great. Dissolved oxygen content could be desired. The pH was good, and the turbidity level was great. One thing to keep in mind is that I did all my tests right here in right next to the creek where these rocks are. So that actually might even increase temperature levels, and it would definitely give me lower dissolved oxygen content. If you look down there, we have what's called a riffle. So that's where all those rocks are kicking up oxygen. So if I did that test down there, I might get a higher score. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not higher levels of dissolved oxygen content in this reach of Johnson Creek. So that's all we have for today. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments and I'll try my best to answer. And thank you so much for watching. We'll stick around to see if we have any more questions. Take a look at the creek here. We've definitely had all these ducks by so far. They're super cute. All right, great. Looks like there's no questions, so we'll wrap it up here. Again, thank you so much for listening and tuning in to Johnson Creek Watershed Council's live event on Facebook, and I hope we see you next week. Thank you.